I'm a former mayor of a small town in St. Helena in Napa County. I'm now the co-chair of the California League of United Latin American Citizens. That's the California Wasteworker Health and Justice Coalition that includes participation from the Worksafe nonprofit, local worker, community, and environmental organizations as well, and participation from the offices of Assembly members Liz Ortega and Pilar Schiavo, who's here with us to speak today. I'll give a brief introduction and background, and then we'll move to our speakers, and we'll keep it moving with our limited time. So if anybody has questions, we can say them to the end, unless it's something imperative. Our panel today includes Assemblymember Pilar Schiavo from Santa Clarita, District 40. Unfortunately, Assemblymember Liz Ortega had an issue that she had to deal with, so Erin Hickey from her office will be speaking with those points. Landfill expert and executive director of Californians Against Toxics, Jane Williams, will be on with us speaking. Jordan Uter from the Worksafe nonprofit, attorney Josh Milon from Workers' Rights Legal Group, and attorney OSHA Orchid from the Santa Clarita Verde area, representing thousands of community members impacted by problematic conditions at the Chiquita Canyon landfill. I don't think there's any way to overstate the gravity of the situation we're looking at and the need for situations that we need everybody's help with. At the Cal OSHA audit hearing in 2025, examining deficiencies in Cal OSHA processes, Assemblymember Ortega asked, when is a company held accountable for worker fatalities? Is it after the first death, the second death, the third? When? This was regarding a company in San Leandro that had 3 worker deaths in 8 years, a very high number of human fatalities. This is a matter, this is beyond only a legislative or legal matter, it's a human matter. It's a public health and safety matter. It's an environmental and climate matter, and it's a civil rights matter. As our invite states, waste workers face some of the most dangerous conditions in California, with Latino workers disproportionately impacted by serious injury and death in the garbage and recycling workplace. Enhanced workforce protections and landfill reform are critical in addressing these concerns and include fires and large-scale contamination incidents. These incidents don't just impact workers, they ripple outward, impacting entire communities. That's the context we want to establish with this briefing, as well as bringing forward some calls to action, which will include, when we look at on the worker side, special emphasis program at Cal OSHA, joint agency task force with California Department of Industrial Relations, Cal EPA, and the California Department of Public Health. We want to see restoration of Cal OSHA's budget that has been cut and commit to funding for better enforcement. And Cal OSHA needs a transformed penalty structure that would increase its deterrent impact and accountability for irresponsible employers. I'll just give you a little bit more background. I was a small town mayor in the town of St. Helena, Napa County. When we started hearing about a series of fires and large contamination incidents discharging into the Napa River from a local landfill, the Clover Flat landfill owned by Upper Valley Disposal Service, I was mayor from 2018 to 2022. During that time, we learned about the death of a Latino waste worker who had died a few years before that, a human being who had been dismembered on the job. Latino waste workers were exposed to radioactive waste and ongoing exposure to contaminated liquid leachate, which is toxic garbage wastewater, as well as long-term exposure to the toxic smokes of ongoing garbage and compost fires. I also learned of a neighbor at the landfill who died of cancer, along with all of his animals, right at the bottom of the landfill drainage. When the wildfire of 2020 burned through the Napa Valley, these Latino waste workers were sent without training or protections to fight the wildfire as it incinerated the landfill, with no warnings of a toxic burning landfill to the community from the company. In 2025, we started hearing about Latino waste worker fatalities in Yolo County and around the San Francisco Bay Area, in Brisbane and San Leandro, where Assemblymember Ortega had been very vocal in advocacy for these workers. With our presentation today, we want to highlight a nexus between statewide Latino waste worker fatalities and impacts and large-scale environmental and public safety impacts from waste and recycling sites, including fires and large-scale contamination incidents. When workers are unable to lodge complaints because of a broken system or being intimidated into silence, we all suffer. From the Chiquita Canyon area, we'll hear about thousands of lawsuits, people getting cancer, people who can't afford to move from the area, people whose children are getting sick, and intimidation of the community. When I spoke up as a mayor in my small town, as an elected official, I was threatened by my local garbage company with lawsuits and veiled threats of violence. I learned that many people in my community had received similar intimidation tactics from our local garbage company when they tried to speak up. We want to work with you all to come up with solutions. We want to work on the legislative side, the legal side, whatever we can do on the human rights side. While these may be private waste companies, they generally operate in public government contracts. Thus, the mechanisms for accountability are available. These companies are profiting greatly from these government contracts, and protections must be written in. One of the things LULAC has done is commissioned a report to the leadership of the Labor and Workforce Development Agency. That should be available in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll also be presenting that to higher level elected officials. So with that, I want to hand it off to Assemblymember Schiavo, who's going to talk about landfill issues at Chiquita Canyon, landfill, and also more broadly throughout the state. We're seeing this as a systemic statewide issue. Thank you for being here.
No, thank you so much. Okay, she's here today. It sounds like you're stepping in her absence. Thank you, and just for her leadership on workers' issues and OSHA, related to OSHA enforcement and accountability, especially as well. And happy to be carrying a bill that's kind of building on work that she's done in the past this year too. But I wanted to just talk about my district a little bit. You've heard about Chiquita Canyon. For those who haven't heard about it, it is a huge, terrible, horrible disaster. More people are going to talk about it, but it is a burning landfill, 90 acres of burning trash that is going to be burning for at least 20 years. It is making people sick. It is as big as 108 football fields and probably growing. And one of the horrible things that's happening recently is that there are fewer places for them to take this toxic garbage wastewater, which is how I'm going to start calling it because I love that. The leachate, the liquid that comes out of landfills, they're running out of places to take it. It's liquefying the landfill, and the landfill is actually moving. The slope on the landfill is moving, and it's moved at least 10 feet since the fall. And there's concerns about the stability of the mound of trash that is burning and whether or not it could go into the fields down below into the community. So it's a terrible situation. There's a cancer cluster where all the neighbors can point to each other and they all have cancer. People, you get a headache every time you go there. I camped there. I've stayed the night at one of the neighbors' homes. And immediately within 30 minutes, I feel sick. And that's inside with doors and windows closed. So these toxic fumes are just going throughout the community and obviously really impacting workers who are right there on the site every day. And unfortunately, it's not, I come out of the labor movement. I was in the labor movement for 20 years before getting elected. But it's not a union location, so you can't get connected to workers through a union and find out what's going on or how people are being trained appropriately. We know that for state workers who will go and do some of the mitigation work, they're from head to toe in supplied air and hazmat suits, dealing with cracks or dangerous areas where leachate may be exposed. And when I have done tours of the landfill, people didn't even have masks on. I mean, nothing at all. So there's a real fear and concern. I am unfortunately blessed with 3 landfills in my district. So I also have Sunshine Canyon, which has a whole separate issue, but similar symptoms and experiences from neighbors where they have headaches and uncontrollable bloody noses and shortness of breath, a hard time breathing, all of the same symptoms that neighbors of Chiquita are having, and that's just kind of filling up with water because unfortunately they didn't manage it correctly over the years, and so it's leading to a bunch of issues. And then I also have Lopez Canyon, which is a composting facility, which Certainly people don't like the smell of it, but it's not on fire, so we're counting our blessings on that one. But, you know, what we have found through this process is that there's 11 landfills in the state who actually have waivers to operate at higher temperatures, which is incredibly concerning. And I think one of the biggest problems when it comes to these waste management companies is that they have really had a culture of hot rodding these landfills and just total disregard for what are even best practices, let alone regulations. And so if they're doing that with the landfills, obviously there's a concern about the same kinds of violations when it comes to worker issues and worker protections. But, you know, we've heard, like, the federal EPA standard is that you shouldn't let your landfill get over 131 degrees, definitely not over 145. This landfill is over, Chiquita's over 200 degrees. I can't remember what the last temperature was. It's over 200 degrees, it's like boiling water temperature, right? The leachate is literally bubbling and boiling and steaming. And I've heard at meetings of landfill staff that we don't really worry until it gets at 150 degrees. And it's not supposed to be over 131. And normal is anywhere from like 80 degrees to 100, really. You should just keep it there. So the fact that you're not worried when it gets to 131 and not even worried until it gets to 150 is exactly, I think, a symptom of a larger problem, which has to do with the culture of these landfills just disregarding safety for the community, safety for the workers. So I have a couple bills to address that. One is AB 28. AB 28 is the Landfill Safety Act, and the bill was held last year. We made it all the way over to the Senate floor, but we decided to hold it because at the same time, CARB was coming up with, the Air Resources Board was coming up with new regulations around methane capture and regulation. And we wanted to make sure that our bill didn't conflict with it and was complementary and worked with that bill, so worked with those regulations. So we held the bill. We've been kind of working on tweaking it to make sure that they're supporting each other. But I think it's a really important bill because it basically requires actions to happen at 131 degrees, at 145 degrees, so that what we've learned, I think, through this miserable, nightmarish process, and I keep looking at Oshea because she lives in the Chiquita Canyon community and is an attorney there representing people as well. But what we've learned through this process is that once it lights on fire, we can't get it out. It's like a chemical reaction where the gases and the liquids that are created through burning the trash and the fire is basically feeding the fire. So it's like this chemical fire situation where all of these chemicals in the gases and all of these chemicals in the leachate will feed the fire and continue to grow it and grow it and grow it. So it's something that you have to get ahead of and you have to stop before it starts. And so that's really what the goal of AB 28 is, to prevent this. So my concern, and I actually reached out to all of the legislators who have some of these 11 landfills around the state to make sure that they are checking in with those landfills, make sure that they are letting them know that they're watching, make sure that they're reaching out to regulators and letting them know that they're watching too, because you know, our state agencies have been doing a ton of hard work to try to get this under control as much as possible, but I also think it wouldn't have happened in the first place if everybody was doing their job better. And so this is, you know, this is something that's concerning, I think, and Jane will probably talk about this more, that we're going in a very scary direction in the state if we're allowing these 11 landfills to be these high temperatures that are going to make it toxic for the workers and toxic for the community. We also had some tragedies happen in our community. Sunshine Landfill actually had a death of a worker not that long ago. You know, digging these drilling these wells where they, you know, take the leachate, the liquid, and the gases out, and it became unstable, and a truck fell over on him, and he did not survive. And so And even further back, there's another severe injury on Chiquita landfill as well. And so, you know, we know that OSHA has not had the support and resources and enforcement that it needs. I have a bill this year too, which is, because I don't remember any of the numbers, it's 2488. And AB 2488 basically is a study bill to study what are some of the folks that could do these positions. Are there people who are qualified but don't have an opportunity for some of these jobs, and how do we figure out filling these open positions that are in OSHA so that we can get more inspectors out into the community, and get more folks doing this work of protecting workers when and where they need it. It requires report backs to the governor and the legislature and and some other things, but I think a really important bill for us to be able to move forward and get the kind of enforcement that we need happening in OSHA, where it's been really difficult to to have the kind of staffing that we need to protect folks. And then the last thing I'll say, just I'm grateful for LULAC's leadership on this, and certainly this is a community, and I think one of the things, not only the workers who are working on the landfills, but often what you find is that landfills are in communities of color. And so Chiquita Canyon was placed in a historically Black community. Verde has this amazing history of being the Black Palm Springs of California, and it was a vacation place outside of LA that people would go to, and then they put a landfill there. Over time, it became more working class and diverse, and a lot of Latino folks have moved into the community, and it's kind of grown since then. One of the few affordable places for people to buy homes in LA, and so it's grown and grown. But it is this this just horrible situation of folks who traditionally do not have power, do not have a voice, and are stuck with these environmental disasters that are making them sick. And killing them, literally. We have far too many people with cancer, and there's been too many funerals this last year. So it's why I'm so passionate about this. It's why people are starting to call me Chiquita Pilar, because I talk about it so much. But once you see it, you can't unsee it, and I think that we have to really make sure that we bring forward policies that provide the support and protection to workers that they need, but also change the culture of this industry that has been, been able to sue and bully their way through taking advantage of communities and taking advantage of workers. And that's something we have to put a stop to. So I'm honored to be a part of that and work with our community, who has been an incredible voice on this issue, and really grateful for this being elevated at the Capitol. It's such an important issue, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Hey everyone, Erin, Hickey, and the Principal Consultant for the Assembly Labor Committee, standing in for Assemblymember Ortega today. Sorry, you're stuck with her backup. But wanted to thank you all for being here to learn more about this important issue for both workers and the community and the environment. Assemblymember Schiavo mentioned that they sort of see this in the context of landfills disregarding safety. We sort of, at the Labor Committee and the Assemblymember Ortega's office, see this also as part of a larger issue of the state not prioritizing workers and worker safety. And I'll give a couple examples of that. The Department of Industrial Relations, as many of you know, they house the Labor Commissioner's Office and OSHA. They have been operating with a high vacancy rate for many, many years, and it's severely affecting their ability to enforce the laws that we pass in Sacramento. As an example, the Labor Commissioner's Office, there are, as of the last count, 47,000 wage theft claims in a backlog waiting to be processed. At OSHA, 35% of inspector positions are vacant, and 9 enforcement offices around the state have vacancy rates of 50% or more. We have 1 field inspector for every 101,000 workers, thanks to Erin for those stats. This issue is particularly important to Assemblymember Ortega given that she is the Assembly Labor Chair, but also she is the Vice Chair of the Latino Caucus, and many of these workers are predominantly Latino, the workforce that's being affected, which is part of why LULAC is involved in this. And that's not an outlier. Latino and immigrant workers have the highest rate of workplace fatalities across the board. They also experience wage theft at 6 times the rate as do US-born white workers. And also, I mean, it's hard not to mention this these days, but in this political climate, it was already difficult for workers to advocate for themselves and to trust government, but it's especially difficult now. So all the more important that we have community members in this space to kind of be the trusted messengers. So a little bit of background just on what our offices have been working on. So in 2024, Assemblymember Ortega ordered an audit of OSHA, which some of you have probably seen. It came out last summer and was quite damning, and some of the biggest issues that were exposed by the audit is that 82% of inspections are being performed by letter. So that means that rather than actually having an inspector go out and look at the workplace, they are basically hearing about an issue from a worker, sending a letter to the employer saying, don't do that, and let us know that you're not doing that. And then they don't ever really get that proof of abatement from the employer, and they check that off as an inspection. That's 82%. OSHA is routinely and often without justification reducing fines for violators. The Bureau of Investigations, which is the unit within OSHA that's responsible for looking at cases that have criminal conduct, doing an investigation and referring those cases to public prosecutors. They are essentially not doing that. They referred 1.7% of their cases to public prosecutors during the audit period, and are largely unable to fulfill their other mandates due to understaffing. OSHA inspectors also aren't documenting things. They take handwritten notes. They have antiquated case management systems that don't talk to each other, and there's no policies and procedures, so every inspector is doing something different, essentially. What this says to employers is that the state is not going to hold them accountable when they violate the law. So workplace accidents and deaths even are often seen as just the cost of business, unfortunately. And in the waste industry, this is especially true. And one of the worst violators is in Assemblymember Ortega's district. It's in San Leandro. It's a company called Alco Iron and Metal, and they are a scrap metal recycling company, and they have had 3 worker deaths since 2017 with very little consequences for the employer. In fact, this employer has been fined more than 60 times since the 90s for various safety violations, and they have one of the worst records in the industry. But for some reason, they have never been criminally charged for any of these deaths, and they continue to operate to this day. OSHA fined the company nearly $160,000 for the 3 deaths, but in each case, the fines were either significantly reduced or still pending years later. So far, the employer has only paid $7,000 for the most recent death, and that's down from the initial citation of $45,000. So I mean, as you can imagine, this is frankly enraged Assemblymember, and Geoff talked about her comments at the oversight hearing that we held last year, where we were trying to get an answer from OSHA as to why they have not referred this case and why they're taking no action. So these cases are part of the reason why Assemblymember Ortega introduced her priority bill this year, which is AB 2321. It would make critical reforms to our workplace health and safety investigatorial process. Essentially, the bill would deputize public prosecutors to help OSHA's Bureau of Investigations, that unit I was just talking about that does the criminal investigations. It would help deputize local DAs to investigate workplace deaths and cases in which there's a permanent total disability to a worker. And it would also codify some of the reforms that were suggested by the auditor, including requiring the Bureau of Investigations to implement policies and procedures for referring or not referring criminal cases to public prosecutors, and would require additional information about staffing levels to what Assemblymember Schiavo was just talking about, so that we can ensure the division is properly staffed to handle these criminal investigations. So that kind of sums up our involvement, or I guess the lens to which we come to this issue. Obviously, again, as labor committee and Liz as our labor chair, the worker issues at all of these facilities are a great concern to us, and we're really happy to be part of this group, and thank you for leading.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Erin.
Of course.
We're going to now move to Jane Williams, who's going to be with us remotely. We're sort of toggling back and forth between the worker side of things and the environmental side. I think it helps build the context of what these workers are facing.
So I think she can be heard.
Recording in progress.
Jane, can you hear us?
Yes.
Great, I think we can hear you. So thank you for being on. This is Jane Williams. She's a landfill expert and executive director of Californians Against Toxics. And we really appreciate you being here and helping us learn more about what's happening at these landfills.
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk in front of this group. So first of all, I'm Jane Williams. I'm the executive director of California Communities Against Toxics, which is an organization that was founded in 1989 in East LA by a number of very prominent environmental justice activists in California. It's now the oldest continuously operational environmental justice network in the country. So we have been around for a long time, and we represent frontline communities at highly polluting facilities. So I've been doing this work since 1992, and I have worked on refineries and steel plants, iron and metal recycling plants, pesticides, chemical disasters, Superfund sites, lots of different things that my members, who are primarily community-based organizations, work on and live next to and breathe the contaminated air and drink contaminated water and deal with contaminated soil. So the one thing I want to tell you that I want you to remember, I really want you to remember this, is that you cannot decouple the impacts at a landfill that the workers experience and that the communities experience. Those are the same experience, because most of the most significant pollution that's coming from our landfills is coming through the air. And so let me talk about that. Landfill gases are actually horribly toxic. They are just like a giant refinery or a giant chemical plant, and the fact that they emit a just potpourri of amazingly toxic compounds, particulate matter, hydrogen sulfide, benzene, dioxins and furans, acid gases, volatile organic compounds, our new forever chemicals, fluorinated. So they're really no different than, say, a large stationary source of pollution. The working phase of a landfill, US EPA has done studies on what is causing all these emissions from landfills. And the working phase is responsible for about 75% of air emissions, according to EPA. And so you can imagine, if you're a worker, you are literally on the front lines of that exposure when you are working at the working phase. The exposures that these workers are getting are no different in magnitude and in potential health impact than our most dangerous and most highly toxic industrial facilities in the country. So every landfill in California has contaminated groundwater underneath it. It's contaminated with the perfluorinated compounds, the forever chemicals, which are some of the most toxic man-made chemicals now. We're regulating them in drinking water in the parts per trillion range. Extraordinarily toxic and very long-lived, like not breaking down the environment. And that is something that we need to come to grips with and tackle, because the leachate is also highly contaminated with these perfluorinated compounds. And now just recent studies of landfill air emissions show considerable amounts of perfluorinatives that are volatilizing out of landfills and going into the air. So we know that these toxic chemicals are in the air, in the ambient air, and where workers and community members and frontline communities are exposed to them. And they're also being collected in gas collection systems and being burned. Now, when you burn some of these compounds, sometimes you make more compounds, a different type of compound. Like you burn chlorine, you can make dioxin. You can burn a fluorotelomere and make a very stable perfluorinated compound that is more toxic. So that's very problematic. And we know that emissions are occurring not only from fugitive emissions, like from cracks and leaks and from the working phases of landfills, but also from the gas collection system itself. Okay, so what I want to tell you, what I hope you will remember, which is something that I found out during the LA fires, extremely sobering to me, as someone who has worked on toxic chemical exposures, both for workers and communities for over 3.5 decades now. So the ash from the LA fires can create landfill fires. So we know from many years of experience with landfills that when you put certain things in a landfill, it increases the potential that that landfill will catch on fire. Like aluminum dross is one of them. I was on the phone this morning with folks from Tennessee where they put aluminum dross in a landfill, and now it's burning. Okay, ash is one of those things. And so we had massive amounts of ash, as I am sure everybody in this room knows, a huge public works project to move the ash from the Palisades fire and the Eaton fire into just a small subset of landfills across Southern California, right? We were trying to minimize the transport and trying to get rid of the ash as soon as possible so that, restoration and rebuilding can occur. There's a lot of things I could get into about how that went down, but one of the most remarkable things to me was that we heard from workers at landfills that they were very concerned about exposure to the ash. As you can imagine, when you dump the trucks of ash, that ash is just going everywhere, right? And if you are working anywhere at that landfill or near that working phase where that ash is being deposited, it is like talcum powder, all right? And landfill workers wanted to purchase and use their own masks that would be regulatory masks, right, that would protect their breathing space. And they were told no, because some of these landfills are right next to freeways and people could see the landfill workers, and they did not want the landfill workers to be seen wearing masks. Okay, so this is something that I learned just over the last year, working on the LA fires, that is so sobering to me, that not only would you not protect your workers, okay, like we know that this is occurring not just in this industry, but in many other industries. We know that OSHA could be more effective, shall we say, much more effective in protecting workers. We know that it is, quite frankly, people of color workers that are on the front lines. Most of my community members, my community leaders of my membership groups across the state are men and women of color. And so we know that this has a racial overtone to it, okay? I mean, we're all adults in the room here, we know what's going on. But I thought it was incredibly shocking to hear that because of complaints around landfills from odors, that now workers are being told, don't wear masks, don't wear protective gear, even if you bring it yourself, because we don't want to alarm the people living around the landfills. Okay, so this is what I want to end with, is what I started with. You cannot decouple the impacts on workers from landfill emissions from the community impacts from the landfill emissions, right? One and the other, they're really not separate. It's all one big morass of highly toxic compounds. And one of the significant problems that Assemblymember Schiavo brought up is we have a number of landfills now that are on fire. We have more that show signs of becoming on fire with temperatures. And once these landfills are on fire, extraordinarily difficult to put out. There's nobody who works on landfill fires, on the regulatory side or on the public side, that is cavalier enough to say that you can even put one out like in 5 years. You're looking at 10 years, 20 years. In some cases, you are basically just going to burn the landfill to the ground, okay? And so the workers that are at that landfill, Key Canyon's closed. It is not accepting trash. There's all kinds of workers there all the time. Hauling leachate, installing gas collection systems, moving equipment around. There's literally, dozens of workers at any single day, but, over the time of a month, there's probably hundreds of workers that are being exposed to different components of what is being emitted from that landfill. So even when a landfill is closed and the working face is no longer emitting, a landfill that is on fire is a very significant source of very toxic air emissions to the air. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. I really believe that we must do a better job, not just with landfills, but throughout our industrial complex on protecting workers. And I look forward to working with the committees and members of the legislature to increase funding and oversight of the Occupational Safety Health Administration in California. Thank you.
Jane, thank you very much. I have just one question. I think it was mentioned that there are at least 10 or so landfills now around the state that are at that elevated temperature that could turn into a burning landfill.
Right, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for being with us.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is George Uter. I am the Legal Policy Associate at Worksafe. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you today. I want to start with a story about Luis Guerrero, who went to work at Northern California's metal recycling facility and did not come home. A forklift collapsed on him. He was killed. But his death was not the first at that company. It was one of 3 worker fatalities tied to the same employer in just 8 years. Each time there were prior violations, each time penalties were appealed or reduced. And each time the pattern continued. And this is not an isolated tragedy. Across the metal recycling industry, missing safety guards and inadequate hazard controls have produced severe injuries, amputations, and even deaths. So when the same incident occurs or reoccurs at the same companies, the conclusion is inescapable that the system is not interrupting the pattern. So California operates its own occupational safety program, one with the authority to exceed federal standards and deliver stronger protections in states that rely on federal minimums. And that is a meaningful opportunity, but it is an opportunity being squandered through a deliberate series of political choices made by this body and by the governor's office. And the evidence for this falls into 3 categories, basically. That Cal OSHA is understaffed, which Erin has gone over already. Cal OSHA is underfunded, and because of those 2 facts, Cal OSHA is underperforming. So to start with understaffed, Cal OSHA's enforcement depends on compliance, safety, and health officers, or COSHOs, who conduct workplace inspections. The latest available public data shows that 95 vacant inspector positions are out of 288 authorized positions. So that results in a 1 in 3 vacancy rate. And this situation is not spread evenly across the state. As Erin said, there are 9 enforcement officers currently that have vacancy rates at or above 50%, such as Fremont and Long Beach, which are both at 70% vacancy. And 7 more offices, including Santa Barbara, San Bernardino, Bakersfield, and San Francisco, who are at 50% or higher. So that's half the inspectors, that's half the enforcement capacity. And in some of California's most populated and industrialized regions. As of January 2026, California has 1 inspector for every 99,000 workers. In contrast, Washington State has a ratio of 1 to 28,000 workers. Oregon, 1 to 23,000. Roughly 1/4 the level of worker protection in those states. And this staffing crisis was documented in plain terms by the California State Audit, thanks to Assemblymember Ortega. Second issue is that Cal OSHA is underfunded. The bulk of Cal OSHA's funding comes from the Occupational Safety and Health Fund, which has a surcharge of 0.001885% on employers' workers' compensation premiums. That fund is entirely independent of state taxes and revenues. Cal OSHA's budget does not compete with schools, highways, or social services. It is funded by employers for the specific purpose of protecting workers. And yet, Governor Newsom proposed and his legislature approved a $16 million cut to Cal OSHA enforcement, effective July 1st, 2025. The governor has now proposed additional cuts for the fiscal year 2026-27. But these cuts are not required by the state's financial condition. The OSHA fund has run a surplus of $200 million in each of the last 3 fiscal years. The money exists. The decision not to spend it on worker protection is a choice, a political choice that is dressed up as a fiscal necessity. For 3 consecutive years, the governor and the legislature have looked at a $200 million surplus dedicated to worker safety and left it unspent. That choice has a human cost measured not in dollars, but in workers who come home with broken bodies or who do not come home at all. Somewhere in California today, a worker will not make it home. A spouse, a parent, a child, someone who was expecting them home for dinner is now planning a funeral. And that cost was foreseeable and it was accepted. The third issue is the underperformance. As the state audit examined Cal OSHA's performance, they found in a final year review that Cal OSHA responded to 82% of validated work complaints for what's called a letter investigation, asking the employers to self-report on workplace hazards. And only 17% of worker safety complaints generated an actual on-site inspection. And when employers themselves reported serious worker injuries and illnesses, Cal OSHA conducted an on-site inspection only 42% of the time. And the conditions have not improved since the audit. In the first 3 quarters of 2025, more than half of all Cal OSHA responses, about 58%, were letter investigations. On-site inspections made up just 42% of responses. Most alarming is that while the number of inspections increased 5% during that period, citations for unsafe conditions dropped dramatically across every major industry area. So compared to the same period in 2024, agriculture citations fell 14%. Construction citations fell 25%. Waste management citations fell 28%. Manufacturing citations fell 37%. Transportation and warehousing citations fell 50%. Healthcare citations fell 53%. So that's more inspections, that's fewer citations, and it's because these chronic vacancies have driven district managers and officers to prioritize volume over substance. Open and close, open and close, open and close. And they're cycling through these complaints to keep pace with the incoming flow rather than conducting substantive inspection to identify hazards and force correction. And I want to be clear that Cal OSHA is not a failed agency. It is an underfunded one that has new leadership now, and we live in a moment when federal enforcement has retreated and California workers have nowhere else to turn. So the choice before the legislature is whether to invest in that potential or to continue to fund it. So to conclude, as I said, Cal OSHA is understaffed, Cal OSHA is underfunded, and as a result, Cal OSHA is underperforming. And California has built a worker safety program with the authority to exceed federal minimums and a dedicated fund, completely independent state revenues to pay for. And Luis Guerrero deserved to benefit from that promise. So did the workers killed at the same facility before him. So do the 19 million Californians who will go to work tomorrow. The answer is not to abandon Cal OSHA. The answer is to ensure it's equipped and empowered to achieve its mission. Thank you.
You think I should stand here?
And we're going to hear from Josh Milon from the Workers' Rights Legal Group. He's representing workers from Upper Valley Disposal Service, Clover Flat Landfill. This is now owned by the company Waste Connections, but also owns the Chiquita Canyon Landfill. Josh, are you ready to?
Yeah. So Waste Connections is a $41 billion publicly traded corporation. So they're big. They have a lot of resources. My name is Joshua Milon. I'm a partner at Workers' Rights Legal Group, and I'm here today to talk about my case against these landfills up in Napa County. So, next slide. Oh. Okay, so these are a couple of my clients. My case right now, the first out of a few cases, it's filed in Napa Superior Court in October of 2025. There's two specific facilities that my clients worked at. There's a recycling center, as you've heard a little bit, and then there's a landfill. The landfill, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Napa, but there's a valley. The landfill sits on the side of the valley up in the mountains at Calistoga. My clients are all Latino workers. In the first lawsuit that is filed, there's 16 of them. 14 of them are Spanish speaking only. Next one. So I want to paint a little bit of a picture about kind of what's going on at these facilities. So the number one thing, or one of the things, is the unsafe equipment that is being used at the facilities. And my clients will talk about this in a lot of detail. They are operating with machinery with faulty brakes, major oil leaks that cause fires. There's been fires when they're driving these vehicles. There's bald tires. They go back and forth between the valley and up on the landfill with some of these trucks that have bald tires. If you see, they're going up around curves on cliffs, and they don't have windshield wipers on some vehicles, all sorts of things like that. There's one driver, Mr. Hernandez, Ricky Hernandez, when he transported trash up the canyons, he complained to his supervisor, said, the tires I'm using are bald. These are largely dirt roads, and I need new tires. And his supervisor said, when the tire pops, you'll get a new tire. You'll get new tires. Another driver was coming down in one of these big dump trucks after unloading some of the trash up at the landfill, and his brakes completely went out and completely failed while he was going downhill. He's very lucky that he was able to commandeer the vehicle into safety, and he didn't die. Next slide. So another issue that the toxic chemical exposure, we've talked about that a little bit. There's leachate going on, there's a lot of leachate water. This place, for years before and after, there's a pattern and practice of illegally dumping the leachate. It is very expensive to properly dispose of the leachate. It's toxic. Nobody wants it. You have to pay to dispose it. So there are times when they dump it on highways. There's times when they dump it in the vineyards near the recycling center. And so also when they do this, it's not just as simple as dumping the water. My clients have been exposed, and the workers are exposed to the water that splashes on them. So they're taking this toxic water that's going on them, and they're taking it home to their families. They've been instructed to wash the heavy equipment with the leachate water. It seems bizarre, but they're asked to do it. There's these grills and grates, and they're asked to wash it again, exposing them to get this leachate on their body. And many of it has the forever chemicals. So in the trash sorting facilities, there's a lot of trash that comes in. They have to sort through some of it in some of the recycling centers. My clients and the waste workers, they sort through all sorts of hazardous waste. There's medical waste, which is really, really gross. There's used syringes in there. There are dead animals, there's feces, there's all sorts of stuff. My clients don't have great protection, great equipment. Some of them have gloves with holes in them. They ask for more gloves, they get thin gloves. Multiple of my clients have been pricked with syringes while they're sorting through this. Nothing terrible has happened to them, but these are, they're exposed to some of these diseases. During the fires, this is an actual video that my clients took of them. As you can see how smoky it is, these are the fires of 2020. And while the firefighters are around the area, are fighting the fires in the hills, they're worried, the company is worried about the landfill catching on fire. Of course, because if the landfill catches on fire, there's a lot of government scrutiny and a lot of different agencies that come. So they had the workers go up and do things that workers don't know how to do. They had them fight fires, cut down trees. This whole thing is a video of these guys cutting down trees, and they have no experience in cutting down trees. They don't know which way it goes. So the trees actually fall down, and there's different types, and different ones of my clients have testified, they all just run because they don't know where the tree is gonna fall. They're not skilled cutters. They're told to work without protective equipment, to use their own bandanas, to use some of the masks that they use are used masks or old masks, and they are in the fire basically putting out fires, doing brush clearance and stuff that they're not trained to do. This wasn't the greatest, but there's some on the side of cliffs that are very steep. The cost of these, many of my clients receive burns, hives, all sorts of respiratory problems, and lingering coughs. Next slide. Falsified records, of course. So the equipment is supposed to have some sort of safety logs, and they're told and encouraged and in fact ordered by their supervisors to falsify the logs. There's basically ordered to omit the mechanical problems, the faulty brakes, the bald tires, the broken headlights, no seatbelts, no air conditioning in the summer, all sorts of things that aren't working on a lot of these vehicles. Next slide. When they do complain, they are faced with retaliation and intimidation by their employer. And this has gone on for a long period of time, including the new company. There's immigration threats. The majority of my clients are Spanish speaking only. They have basically said you're going to get in trouble with the immigration authorities, and there's a fear of that going on. Threats of going to jail. The company often brags or has bragged in the past about being very close with the St. Helena Police Department, with a Napa County Sheriff, and said, you guys are going to jail if you keep complaining about this stuff. There's a lot of injuries that happen due to this faulty equipment. They're highly, highly encouraged not to go to the hospital, not to file any kind of reports, not to file any workers' comp claims. So when the employees that do that, they are retaliated against and they are given the worst jobs. They are sent up into the landfills where it's more dangerous. They're put on the more dangerous equipment. And sometimes their hours are cut, their overtime is cut, all sorts of different things that happen to them if they complain. In fact, in April of 2024, they said, oh, we're having a reduction in force. They laid off a few of the workers, and all of the workers happened to be the ones who had complained about some of these safety violations. Next slide. So this is one of my clients. What you can do to protect the workers. I come at this from a litigation standpoint. I'm a plaintiff attorney. I'm not, super familiar with all this legislation. Is really they need effective workplace protections and the law. They need enforcement of the law. They need OSHA. They need all sorts of things like that. The workers need to be encouraged to file both internal and external complaints about safety violations. They are the front line. They are the ones who know about the issues with the safety going on at the facilities. Overall, basically, we're looking for laws that are protecting the most vulnerable. These are all Spanish-speaking, all Latino clients. This will not only help, it'll help workplace rights, but it'll also help protect the environment and the disasters at the landfills. This will prevent a situation like what's going on at Chiquita Canyon. So with that, I turn it over to my colleague and friend, Oshea Orchid. You want me? Oh.
Okay, hi everybody. So we've covered, we'll see if Josh is better at doing the slideshow than I am. We've covered already a lot of what I was gonna cover, but I'm just gonna go over a few things. Pilar is obviously my state assembly member, louder. And I'm an attorney also. I represent thousands of people that live in the area surrounding the Chiquita Canyon landfill. And I actually own homes there too. And I say I own homes because no, I don't live there anymore. After knowing what's going on, I've had to move. And instead of living in any of the homes that I pay a mortgage on, I live in another home that I rent across town. You can do the next slide. So Verde, as Pilar was mentioning, is a very interesting community. It used to be called the Black Palm Springs. And so it has this great history of all of these cool events that they used to have, and now people aren't comfortable even doing anything there outside because they're really concerned about what's happening at the landfill. We can go to the next slide. The landfill opened in 1972, and it's so sad because they were having all these amazing events at this park, and of course, out of all the places in the county, where should we put the landfill? They put it in what would have been the best community that Black people had, right? Of course, it didn't go to Beverly Hills. The landfill then has been expanded since, and we can go to the next slide. And basically in 2019 is when we now know, that's when the underground fire started. The landfill, this is actually a really good just like overview, but that area that's in yellow, that is the landfill. Then you can see how close all these things are. These are schools, businesses, and most importantly, everybody's homes that can't get away from this because it's so close. We can go to the next slide. And what's happening? It's just too much trash in this space. It's too close to a community. I think longer term, we need to start thinking about there should be a barrier between communities and how close we're putting in a landfill, because anything that's going to be this close, we talked earlier about some of the toxic chemicals, Jane did a great job of covering that, is just too close to be near people. And so this is like making the decision, I don't want to live right next to the freeway. Nobody should be making the choice to live this close to this many toxic chemicals. Now this is turning into hazardous waste, like Josh just talked about with the leachate. You can see them in some of these photos. There's some leachate that's getting into storm drains and whatnot, but you can also see it spraying out in that middle photo. That's a geyser where it's got so much pressure that it is flying out of the landfill. And you can see that's actually a pretty good picture of the worker who's in full protective gear because they know this is extremely hazardous conditions. We can go to the next slide. Benzene is one of the most concerning chemicals. This is what's causing it to be hazardous waste. And there's a lot of long-term effects. At the beginning, it's things like headaches, dizziness, drowsiness, nausea. But with more serious exposure, this is causing people cancer. And so that's what we're seeing in our community, as Pilar was mentioning, the cancer cluster near the exposure to this. And we can go to the next slide. This is a AQMD put this together actually. And this, I really liked this because it shows the level of what is, we're concerned about. And this shows a long period of, from November of 2022 to December of 2023, all the times that we were above those levels. And this is measurements that are coming from, everyone agrees it's the landfill and AQMD working together to take these measurements. So they use this to kind of show why we're getting all these exceedances in the monitors. Anyway, this is also really concerning. Jane talked a little bit about hydrogen sulfide exposures are really concerning. So we can go to the next slide. We did a survey. This is actually our first survey, and we've surveyed more people since. But essentially, this just roughly shows you what people are reporting as far as their symptoms in our community. Now we have, this is when we first started the case, this is only about a little over 1,000 people surveyed. We now have 10,000 people that have filed into our litigation and said they are also having symptoms or impacts from the landfill. So having it get to this point, we now have so many people that are impacted, it's ridiculous. And so that's where a lot of the legislation here is a focus on. We cannot have this epic of a problem and let it continue in other places where we let it get this out of control. We can go to the next slide. This is just a really long list I won't read to you of all the agencies that have been involved. And they've been cited every which way, but it's not fixing the problem. Literally, since this law, we started the litigation in 2023, I have not heard once that we have good news. They're getting the problem under control. So obviously the citations and what's happening here is not enough to incentivize them, and there needs to be more. That's why some of this legislation is really important. And I think that's the next slide. So this is, again, a long list. Let's go to the one that has I think it's the next one. Yeah. So we put this together for today's presentation, a list of the acts that our Assembly members have been working on. Last year, Schiavo was able to get AB 27 through, and that gave tax relief to our residents who were getting money from the landfill for the mitigation efforts. So that was something we accomplished last year. But AB 28, as she mentioned, is still pending, really important for trying to get these landfills held more accountable when they're having the elevated temperatures, because the only way to stop this is to get them incentivized to solve the problems earlier before these out of control incidents get going. Okay, and then she also mentioned AB 2488, which is the study. And then we also have here Ortega's bill on workplace investigations. Thanks so much, everybody that came. We really appreciate you looking into this and taking this seriously.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Alfonso, do you want to speak a little bit about the legislation?
Yeah, so, hi everyone, my name is Alfonso. So just like the member mentioned, and Oshea and a couple other folks, AB 28 has been our 2-year bill. We've been working on it in amendments to kind of match the CARB regulations that are going to be coming out, these LMRs. And the implementation date will be the beginning of next year to kind of match what they're going to be putting out with the 131 degrees threshold that landfill operators need to be operating to start mitigating efforts with the many organizations at the local level and at the state level. And the other bill we're working on as well, AB 2488, is hopefully going to create a study to kind of look at the gaps to those health inspectors at Cal OSHA, where these communities can best be put in these pipelines, look at the application process, make it more streamlined. I'll leave my card here and some fact sheets for you. Feel free to call me, email me. I'm happy to follow up on these other pieces of legislation. And just we really urge folks to reach out to representatives, labor staffers, environmental staffers to bring more awareness about these issues that are being raised. It's really hard to describe in words how important this is to the member and to the entire state of California. People are dying. And even when I went to our district for our staff retreat, I then started developing headaches and migraines just in the 2 days that I was there. It's really urgent that we get this done and prevent this from happening to other communities across the state. But thank you so much. And thank you, Geoff, for all your work on this. It's been very helpful.
Thank you. This is Alfonso from Assemblymember Schiavo's office. Thank you. Thank you, OSHA. Thank you, Josh. I'm going to wrap up in just a minute here, but I want to talk about one aspect of this, which is radioactive waste. In all these issues, we've tried to push this up the food chain at the Water Board, at Cal Recycle, at Cal OSHA, and really have just been summarily dismissed in the concerns about the contamination, the fires, whatnot, which is frustrating in itself. But then bringing forward concerns about radioactive waste, at least 2 of these waste sites have workers talking about their concerns with radioactive waste coming in, and in the case of Upper Valley Disposal Service, Clover Flat Landfill, that's now owned by Waste Connections, there's a trail of an incident that occurred in 2018 where the landfill had brought in used fracking tanks to contain a leachate problem. They had overloaded their landfill and couldn't contain the leachate. And these used fracking tanks had radioactive material in them that many workers were exposed to, and one was sent out of state. It was very hard to get information because the workers were really afraid to speak about this or felt that they couldn't speak about it without risking their jobs and whatnot. It is now 2026, and so for the last 8 years, I was the mayor of the town trying to get information about what was going on with this radioactive waste, where do we make the reports, what should we do? Finding out that the Department of Toxic Substance Control doesn't handle it, OSHA doesn't handle it. These state agencies just kept directing us to different agencies. So I'm now, this is 2026, 8 years later, still trying to map and navigate how we report radioactive waste concerns in California. So those are supposed to go through the California Department of Public Health radiologic branch, but getting there is a whole nother rabbit hole to try to navigate. And so I'm a person who's really dedicated my time to figuring this out. So I can't imagine an employee, particularly an employee who might have challenges with the English language, trying to navigate how to even file a report if they're worried about encountering radioactive waste. At one of these sites, they're certain that they are encountering radioactive waste, but they're not given the proper Geiger counter to document it. I've put in reports about these fracking tanks, whatever happened to them. They were sitting at the landfill, Clover Flat landfill, in early 2020. The glass fire burned through the landfill. Josh showed the photos, burning the methane system, the leachate system. Neighbors reported a giant explosion. And we have no documentation that those radioactive frac tanks were ever moved from the site. So 8 years later, still, or 6 years from 2020, still trying to find out what happened to those tanks. Every agency points me to a different agency. Eventually we'll get there, but I'm just trying to put that on the radar that how we track radioactive waste in California should be a priority for our communities as well as in terms of worker protections. So with that, I think we'll wrap up. I don't know if there are any questions. You can certainly contact us. We'll continue our work with this because it's so critical.